Okay, welcome to another Tech Talk with René. And this time I have Kellyn Pot'Vin-Gorman with me. And we're going to be talking a little bit about women in technology. And for me, it has always been a very interesting topic. But I would think in the past 2 years, when I became a dad of a daughter, this now for me is a topic that I like to bring up with everybody, and who better to have this conversation with than with Kellyn, who I consider like just the coolest person to be around with and learn from, and I consider her my mentor across I think now we've known each other for the past 10 years. But I'll let you introduce yourself, Kellyn, and who you are before we get into this conversation.
Sure. My name is Kellyn Pot'Vin-Gorman, or Kellyn Gorman, depending on which side of the fence you talk to, Microsoft or the Oracle side. I've been a multi-platform DBA, and I'm considered an Oracle SME on Azure. I've been with Microsoft for the last 4 years, but I worked for Oracle at a certain time, along with other large companies as a multi-platform specialist. I started out in Oracle and SQL Server 25 years ago and took on other database platforms over the years. I started a lot of WIT programs within the Oracle industry after I started noticing that just so many women were leaving the industry that I knew. I literally had only a handful of women DBAs that I had worked with still in the industry, and I was trying to figure out why, understanding it. And it was a challenge for me. So I wanted to find a way to try to retain women better. I called it, they were leaving because of the death of 1,000 pinpricks. And so I wanted to try to come up with solutions that would help the women around me kind of recover from those pinpricks, not receive those pinpricks that were impacting them. And I've done that throughout my career. I'm still doing that today. Had phone calls even yesterday on this, of how do we make the industry better. It's important to me, and that's on the Microsoft side. But I still mentor people today. Just it's really near and dear to my heart, because I always want people to have a better day, I think, than I have each day.
And that's, again, why I think like you're one of the coolest people that I know. Like all of the work that you do around not only the technical side of it, because you're super smart, right? I wish to become you one day, right? But it's all of the personal side as well that you do, right? I'm gonna open up the conversation with a quote from Lori Wright, who's the general manager of workplace collaboration at Microsoft, right? And what she mentions is, I believe women will only work and stay in tech if they feel welcomed and have a voice. Women need to see tech as a place where they can belong, and tech needs to work hard to help women belong, because otherwise companies will offer products that only represent half of the population, right? So I think that's a very, very powerful statement that Lori is doing, right? And that brings up like the very first question that I have, right? Which is, the percentage of women in tech was higher in the 80s than it is today. From your point of view, why did this happen, right? Why did this percentage start to go down in this day and age?
So it's a complex situation. And, I discussed this I did write a book called Crushing the IT Gender Bias, which is still available out there if you're looking to have something that puts you to sleep at night. But I really enjoyed writing it because it required a lot of data. And I will tell you that I was challenged. It was, as I quoted data points and put information in there, people would come back and go, well, that's just your opinion. Even editors. And I'd come back and go, no, here's the reference at the bottom. And it was hard for them to believe. Being a child from born in the 60s and raised in the 70s and the 80s, I kind of went through this. And what you were seeing is that in the 70s as a child, I remember that I had very gender neutral clothing and toys, even my Legos. They weren't pink, they weren't purple. I could play with almost anything, but I also was starting to see some of these challenges. And, we start thinking automatically that it's much less gender specific as we go through time, that I was challenged, and I did grow up in a much more rural area, that family members, when I was trying to keep up with my male cousins, because I was the first female born in my generation, I would try to play in the cold creek. Everybody was trying to stand in this ice cold creek as long as they could. And I'd be out there and they'd be like, Kellyn, come in, Kellyn, come in. And I'd be like, but Corey and Craig get to stand out there. I want to stand out there too. And finally, when my aunt said, oh, honey, you're a little girl, come here. And I remember thinking how more fun it was to be a boy. They just got to do things. They got to break the rules. They got to just do things. And as a girl, they expected me to sit down and sit nice and not mess up my tights. And yeah, I probably was standing in the cold creek in my tights. I'll admit that. But, you realize this. You realize that there were certain expectations and that my ADHD brain couldn't wrap around it. I thought I should be able to do everything that my male cousins could. As we got into the 80s, toys started to change. It became, where before I always wanted clothing in like greens. That was my favorite color. But my sister loved purples and pinks. She wanted clothes in purple and pink. You couldn't get them as we were growing up. But by the time my youngest sister started to come into, that age, it was starting to get into the 80s, the colors changed. And I remember this for high school. I graduated very early 80s, that all of a sudden I could get shirts with pink. That was not something you could get before. You see the whole color distinction of the pink and purple aisle versus the blue and primary color aisle for boys. That's when it started to separate. You also saw the distinction in toys. Suddenly girl toys were pink and purple and boys were primary colors, as well as even science toys, and that were starting to be geared towards boys. And computers started being geared toward toys. I remember I had this toy called the Spelling Bee, which was this looked like a calculator, but it had a game on it with just, it was simple, and I can't think of the word I want to use for it because, as you already know, it's been a very long week for me, that you would spell out, and if you spelled the word correctly, that it said, because it had a little computer voice with it, it would tell you won, and you keep going up levels. And this was actually geared towards boys, wasn't geared towards girls, even though it was spelling, because it was considered a computer toy. And I had to beg my mother and father for this, beg them for it. Anything that I wanted, like I wanted a science kit, and I was told by my family members, no, that's a boy toy, you can't have it. I couldn't get the electronic kits, any of that stuff. I probably got into computers so late, which was in my 30s, because it was never promoted to me as a career ideal. It was thought of as a male-dominated industry, even though I was one that was taking apart, electronics and clocks and TVs at a very young age. I was scolded for it, where somebody, if they had been male, probably would have said, maybe you should become somebody that works in electronics. It was not thought of first. And it was a simple bias issue that goes down to marketing, goes down into toys, goes into our thought process of who will enjoy this. And it impacted the industry. So at that time, the 80s started to see a direct drop in women, where in the 60s and 70s, computer positions were considered data entry, and women did those roles in those careers. By the 80s, it started being promoted to men, and men started taking those jobs, especially as they became higher paying jobs. And this kind of kept going on as we started to have also those gender related toys, and what was girl, what were boys, became a big deal in the 80s and the 90s.
Oh, wow. I mean, I got to grow up in the early 80s, 90s, right? But by the time I got to that point, right, everything was just blue and pink. For me, everything was blue and pink. So it was.
So do you see the pictures of like kids from the 70s where the girls have the orange and brown and green striped shirts, just like the boys? I had brown corduroys. Our clothes, Garanimals, weren't boys and girls separated. Everybody, all Garanimals were all for one set of kids. They weren't separated by boys and girls until the 80s.
Oh, that's so interesting. I would have never thought, like for me, it would have been like, yeah, that's the way it is, and that's the way it has been. And again, for me, I really like you mentioned that computer was geared towards more girls than boys. By the time I started to get, it was, I remember being in my first Fortran class when I was a kid, and we didn't have any girls in there. Like, it was all boys. It was,
and that's
so
another
good.
layer. That's another
Yeah.
layer of this complex situation of also, I mean, I was always the nerdy girl. I liked nerdy things. I love that in this day and age when girls say, I'm into Comic-Con, I'm into these nerdy things, that we at last say kind of, excuse me, you do you, you be you. You know, you've got those clicks and it's all right. We kind of say, I'm not popular, who cares? But I remember the drive when I was, you know, by the time you're 8, it starts. By the time you're 12, it's a big deal. You want to be that cool girl. And to be that cool girl, it's not cool to be nerdy. It's not cool to be brainy. It's not cool to be anything other than pretty. And that was a big deal when I was growing up. That my sister was this beautiful little girl with this blonde curls and the blue eyes. Our faces didn't look that different if you were to look at them and say physical attraction wise. But I had this short, dark hair. I was very nerdy. I never sat still. I was not considered attractive. And I remember how it just seemed so much easier to be my sister as a girl than it was me, because I didn't fit that ideal of what a girl would be. This all plays into that role, so that even that you have girls that may be more analytical in their mindset, may be interested in computers and everything else. We're hearing constantly from TV, from media, from family members, from everyone around us, our peers, that this isn't cool and this is not what you want to be, because we think of girls being something else, that they, you know, the girl next door kind of scenario, that you shouldn't be noisy, boisterous, loud, bossy, all of those things that really take us out of the running sometimes to do what we really want.
No, and again, that's so interesting, right? But then that gets me to my next question, right? Because let's say in your case, you made it into the tech world, right? And all of these women that are either entering, right, or have been. And one of the things that I read, right, was that 1 out of, or what is it, 1 out of 4, or no, give me a second. So it's 40% of women in technology today have considered switching careers, right?
Yeah.
And some of them are thinking that only 4 years into their career. And for me, that was astonishing, right? Because it's like, oh wow, I mean, I love what I do, right? Sometimes there's things that I want to like kill or throw away, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't love the industry that I am.
Yeah.
And it's sad. I don't want to use the word sad, but it's astonishing reading that only 4 years into your career and you say, I'm done with it, right? And it's because, going back to the quote from Lori, right? The environment that they're around, it's sometimes so aggressive towards women, right? Or at least the way that I see it.
I don't
What's
know
your
if it's,
take on it? What's your take on
yeah, I don't know if it's always even so much aggressive. Remember, it's the death by 1,000 pinpricks. It's the small microaggressions. It's the small challenges. I remember when I started out, my male peers, I think it's natural for you. I'm going to step back here. I think it's natural for you when you start anything. You start this even when you're a toddler. How do you learn to do things? You look at the adults around you, you look at your peers, you see how they're doing things and you learn from them and you progress. So when you come into a job, you look at the people around you, you see what they're doing, how it works, you learn from them and you progress. And if you're working in a male dominated industry, you're going to probably be around men, see what they do, and you're going to learn from them and do what they're doing and you're going to progress. Except for women, that's not happening. You're learning from your peers. And I learned that very quickly, that I couldn't do the same thing my male peers could do. That even my male peers were noticing it, that if I duplicated what they did, if somebody was uncomfortable with me being outside the box that they were comfortable in me being in, a bias, a discriminative discrimination even, I could end up in a bad place. I could end up with my job at risk. I could end up with somebody pretty much making a target of me, being a bully. Women and people of color are more likely to be a bully's target. You know, for someone to say, oh, they're always the target, they're usually the first target. They are. What most men will realize is that after they've run all the women and the people of color out, they go after the men next, their fellow male. They always have to have a target. It's almost like a drug. They have to do this. But we noticed this, and I noticed this. I was a target, and I noticed it. I'd be like, but he's doing it. Why can't I do it? But remember, I was the first girl in my generation. So I was already feeling this from when I was young, when my male cousins would do something. I'm like, he can do it. Why can't I do it? So I recognized that feeling. I noticed that. I was able to correlate those two situations and understand when it was somebody else's problem and not mine. But I also had to navigate that. So that helps with those pinpricks of saying, I'm not going to take that on myself. I'm not going to take that pain, that pinprick, but realize that I had to learn how to navigate around it. And it was hard, understanding that, you know, and I have a unique situation. My husband and I, we started working together when I was a junior DBA, and he was just an incredibly skilled DBA that I had the opportunity to work with at first. But we have worked together at 4 different companies. And with that experience, we have been able to see a lot of the unintentional bias that is completely transparent to other people. We learned very quickly that he can say things in emails in person that I cannot. He can do things, approach things that I'm not allowed to. What has been the most fascinating thing is going to Microsoft in a company that puts diversity and inclusion from the top down in everything that they do. It is changed for me. I have been here for 4 years now. A lot of folks are surprised that you've been here happily, you know, for 4 years. That's pretty amazing. I was known as the 2-year kid, that I would leave a company after 2 years. I'd do my 2 years time and go, I'm out of here. And I would strategically and carefully kind of isolate myself from any bullies, because they will find you, especially someone like me who thinks that I should be able to do the same things that other people do and get ahead and build my career. And I was able to move forward. At Microsoft, I was actually respected. That at Microsoft, people treated me as an equal. At Microsoft, I had opportunities to sometimes be treated with an elevated privilege than my husband was as a white dude. That was amazing. We've never had that before. At the end of the day, Tim and I will often sit down and realize that we have equality for the first time that we've never had in any other company, any other industry. And that is a lot of credit to the diversity and inclusion that Satya brought in 2014 and progressed through the company, again, from the top down, that it's in everything that they do. And you recognize that diversity and inclusion is not self-sustaining. That goes for women in tech, that goes for people in color. There's still a long way to go for people in color. They still do not have the equality in our industry that they need. Women, it doesn't mean that I also want to say, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be problems. There's not going to be mistakes. I have had those days where I'm sitting in, and we have a tendency to refer to this as the bomber dudes. You've got a bomber dude in one of the, you know, the old school Microsoft guys that will disregard me, that you will present them with data and they'll go, yeah, I know that's in your head, but, and you'll be like, excuse me. Yeah, and you'll be like, no, we're going to step back. We're going to look at this data that I presented you, that you have in your hand, and you're not going to, you know, dismiss me. You're going to understand this is a situation and I need you to hear me. I can say that though at Microsoft. I may not have had that voice when I was somewhere else.
And that brings up, like, when you were mentioning, right? And that's a very good segue into at least my train of thought, where on the death by 1,000 cuts, right? And these patterns that you started to see when you were little, right? And all of these things that were kind of like being microaggressed to you, right? Mm-hmm. My question to you here is, how can we help young women and people who are in the industry, right? To have a better shield against these microaggressions, because these microaggressions, at the end, or the way that I see it, we need to build a culture to not have them. But right now, they're not going to go away, right? And what that means is we need to sort of say, we need to build, or let me just rephrase that. Do we need to build a culture? Do we need to build a group? Do we need to build, or what is it that we need to do so that these women who want to be in technology or are in technology can say, you know what, it's them, it's not me, it's them that are doing these microaggressions towards me.
It does help to have that support group, to have what I like to call support pods. Even when I was, doing WIT at Oracle, we had a tendency to come up with small pods of people that could kind of backfill to each other and support. And some days, I'll be honest with you, there were days where like Heli Escal and I would just have a conversation via text message. Today just sucked. Yeah, it sucked. How was your day? You have those days and you feel better for somebody who understands what is going on. I love my male peers that I would work with, and they would have to admit to me, Kellyn, I just can't understand this because I've just never gone through this. And that's all right too. Focusing on education over persecution is incredibly important. I think it's natural for us to want vengeance. I think it's natural for us to go, even though I know it's his fault, I want him to pay. You can get that out of your system when you're, dealing with somebody and that's there for your support, and say, but it's not going to get me to my goal. It's not going to get that person to persecute them, to understand where this is wrong, how to learn, how to grow, and make sure they don't do it the next time. To be self-aware and understand why it is wrong, why we limit, and that most of the time it's unintentional. They aren't aware that they've done it. This is built in from the time of childhood, and that's how you change through time. I've had some uncomfortable situations and where I've seen the benefit where we've been able to grow past it, where I have been given great closure, is where we've said, this was wrong and this is why it was wrong. And maybe the first sorry wasn't as, sincere as I'd liked, but the subsequent sorries were. They understood why I stood by them and said, I want this addressed the right way. No, firing this person doesn't help. And I will also say HR many times is our worst enemy and not our greatest help. And keeping them honest. Those support pods help, allies help. I've also had some uncomfortable situations, and I always want to say as a female, I can take care of myself. I can deal with this. But when I deal with it many times in a public situation, it's then me against them, and they feel attacked. When a male ally or an ally of some sort comes in and addresses the problem, even another female, when they come in, they feel attacked. Again, they're already not showing respect to that female peer in this situation. And I also want to say, sometimes this is a female who's causing the problem. Even though we're in a male-dominated industry, we can have bias come from another woman to a woman, not just male to women. A male peer can come in and go, I see that there's a problem here. Let me get this person out of here. Maybe have a talk and go, I'm not all right with this. Please don't do this again. Because I have had male peers do that for me. Or check on me afterwards and go, are you all right? Because I know if this happened to me, I'd be really upset. That makes a huge difference. You have no idea how much of a difference that makes, because that's saying, I know you're not imagining this. I know this happened, and I'm here for you. For somebody to say, I know this happened, don't do it again, and I'm seeing what she's seeing. Again, that makes a huge difference. That gives you closure. In the Microsoft side, there are a lot of women in the industry that are phenomenal, that have been there for 25, 30 years. I don't see that so much on the Oracle side. And some of these women have been on the front line, and what they have gone through in their history as the Microsoft community has matured amazes me. What they go through today in the larger technical field amazes me. And even though they've survived the pinpricks, you see the scars it has left. And it just astounds me when I see it from them. And I want to protect them. I want to try to fix these scars. And sometimes you can't. But it's a challenge. It's how do we keep the damage from happening? And I think that is, again, with open conversation, have real conversations, make people aware, help them grow, help them be more, and also support each other. For the women, we're in a weird time right now. There was a pandemic. Many user groups were feeling the inability to have larger events. Events are growing smaller. People aren't attending as much in person. That means that, in all honesty, there are less chairs, less seats at the table. There are less opportunities for people to come up against that glass ceiling, get farther ahead. And that also means that there's going to be less women, less people of color that are able to bridge that are able to get where they want to go. It's natural. It's not intentional. This is just what we're facing. So we even have to face more, and we have to force more to give equality. It's difficult. We must lift while we rise. And if we don't, this isn't self-sustaining. It's not going to change the world. We are going to be faced with the same people creating products, technology that does not reflect what our world is. It's not going to reflect that over 50% of our world is female. It's not going to reflect the percentage that we sincerely have of people of color in the world, because it is changing. As much as we always call white male majority, I'm sorry, it's not. It's actually a minority. It is the majority that is in power. It is the majority that we think of when we first make decisions. And we unfortunately have a culture around that.
I mean, I don't know what better way to express it than you just did, right? And I think it scares me, right? And again, like, I have a 2-year-old daughter, and it's like, what is it going to be like for her when she gets to, and not only when she gets to the job world, right, but all across her life, right? But it does.
Before you go forward, can I answer that?
Sure.
I think just teaching her to love herself, to teach her to think with her mind, feel with her heart, speak with her mouth, and not confuse any of those. Say what she means. That is so valuable and rare this day and time. So many people react. They don't think about how their reactions, they don't think long-term strategy. They don't think about the goal they're trying to achieve. And that's why we are in the place that we're at. So I think when you teach your children that, they will succeed. And for women, it's something that we're never taught. We're taught over and over again, you should be cute. You should smile more. We still hear that all the time. People are like, no, that's not happening. It happens every single day. And we don't realize that we have women policing other women even. Oh, did you see what she wore? Oh, I like your shoes. We network through coming up to other women going, I love your hair. And it's like, could you tell me what I did professionally that's really cool instead at work? It's really important to think about how we communicate with each other, how we connect with each other. Women many times are not prepared to deal with the real world. We're still prepared for a world that is the 1800s. And just to get a little political, there's some people who would like it to be that way.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about this, I don't know, like all day, right? Because then it brings up into the segue of politics and how people play into that, and
we both like shifted uncomfortably right then.
Yeah.
Like, oh god, yeah.
Like, and even myself. I mean, I'm from Mexico, and I've gotten set. I think from my end, it's easy to detect those microaggressions, right? And even when I do them, right? And I was talking
you
with
have a high emotional intelligence too, and I think that's important. Those people that have a wide variety of intelligence levels, because you can have people that are extremely, statistically intelligent and are unself-aware, do not have that emotional intelligence. They may have a lot of common sense, and yet they may not know a lot of facts behind that and make mistakes. You have to have that variety, that well-rounded intelligence. I think that serves you well in the world.
Yeah, no, and I think, like, as I try to go forward, and one of the things that I've learned from you, right, is supporting the women around me, right, and noticing and trying to notice those microaggressions. Like I had this conversation with one of my colleagues here at Eclipses, that she mentioned that when she's the only woman in the room, like, it's implicit for her that she's going to be taking notes. So it's kind of like those things, and
Yeah.
and when she mentioned that to me, like, oh wow, it really is a microaggression that I hadn't even noticed, right? So start noticing all of that, and just putting them back into kind of like my world, and say, you know what, next time I'm in the room, I'm just going to say, you know what, I'm going to take notes, or I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be trying to support you as much as possible. Because one of the things that I didn't do in the past was I did stay quiet. I said, you know what, it's between them. I don't have to get into that, right?
Yeah.
And by learning all of these, not only percentages, but being in there, and talking with people like you, right, is, no, I want to be there to support you, right? And so when you mentioned those pods, right, for me, the takeaway is that it doesn't have to be all women, right? Like, there's men that's here to support you, and that want to support you,
Because we're
that
all
want,
part of the solution.
yeah, no, and that want to see you excel at what you do, right? And that we know that you're awesome at what you're doing. So I would, for everybody that's watching this, right, I would say not only women are here to support you, it's men that are here to support you as well. And I would say, in that example that you put, right, sometimes we have, because of the world that we live in, we have that voice. Reach out to us, and we'll be here to protect you as much as we can, right? Or not protect you, but
you have
be
the
that,
opportunity to
be
in.
that voice, right? Be that
Yeah.
voice that, so that it doesn't happen, and that we don't hear these percentages of in 4 years, right? We want you here in this world, and again, see you excel at it, right? So
My male allies, I don't know how, some of these situations would have gone if they hadn't stepped in, because at that point, I know my mind is racing, thinking, how do I get the person who is literally, violating my space at that moment? I may know this person. I may know them well. And I don't want to embarrass them. They may have had too much to drink, all these different things. It's going through your head. And you're like, how do I get me out of this? I remember thinking, I work with my husband, thinking, where is my husband? Is he about to kill this person? Is other people seeing this? Your brain is going a million miles an hour. You're thinking through this really, really quick. The one thing you want is for this all to just go away. You're like, make it go away. And for a male ally to come in and just dispel the situation very, very quickly, because they're not in that involvement right there, that interaction, that is a huge weight off your shoulders. It is so appreciated. It makes such a huge difference. And it saves both, not just the person that is being violated, who is the victim in that point, but also the person who may have put themselves in a position they really shouldn't have, and is, the instigator of the problem. Because again, many times that I see this, alcohol is involved. It's at a event, or it's at a company celebration, something. They are going to be incredibly embarrassed the next day when they sober up. And I think you can put yourself in their shoes and be pissed at them, ticked off. Sorry, cursing over here, and at the same time be incredibly regretful. And you're going to hope they're really regretting the whole situation. And if you are a human being, treat them as you would want to be treated. So you are angry at them for treating you, mistreating you, and at the same time going, I want you to learn from this and never do it again. And I also want me to have closure from it. And that's your goal. It's your long-term strategy. You want it fixed. You want it fixed. And that's where a male ally may have a lot more power than you do, plain and simple. That they can come in and talk to this person. They will listen to the person a lot more than they will listen to the person that they've just created a situation with, and probably sobering up really quick and realizing it. There's a lot of complexities to this that an ally makes a huge difference, just plain and simple. And I know you were asking me earlier about keeping women in the industry, and I know I kind of went a long way around because it's a complex, subject on this. But I often feel that the women that do get closures in situations, that do have these support pods, that are able to work through these situations, they are the ones that will be retained in the industry. They are the ones that are able to move past this. There is another group that they just look at the industry, and because they can't move up, they can't take on the same challenges that their male peers may be able to because of these biases. They may see it's just easier for me to go to another industry. And I will tell you, you see them going to real estate, project management, technical marketing. It's surprising that there's a certain circle that these all seem to go to that is more expected to have more women in it, and they're able to move up very quickly. We talk about these microaggressions. One of them that really has always bothered me is that I will send out an email response to a group, and it's all males and myself, and I will receive crickets to the point that I think my email hasn't gone through. I will have to ask my husband. He'll be on the email chain. I'm like, did my email just not go? What happened? No. But then suddenly down the road, I will receive a single email response, not to the group, just to me. And the reason this is that they want to still look cool to the rest of the guys, but they want to show me solidarity and respond back and say they agreed with me. It is the most frustrating thing on the planet. I still have never been able to break this, broach this, and it is something that happens constantly. What I noticed was the fallout from it is that we stop communicating. We as a woman go, why even bother sending? Nobody's going to respond back anyway. And I see this with a lot of women. They'll say women aren't collaborating. They're not collaborating because we receive no comment back. And when you ask women about this, they will go, yes, that's what's going on. It's one of those uncomfortable conversations that people aren't having with women, and then asking why. They're not collaborating because you're not responding. And it's really an interesting challenge of bias that we have. We need to talk about that problem because it's a big one that nobody seems to be figuring out. And I have never been able to find a solution for.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, that's, and again, it kind of like blows your mind.
I'll let you think on that one.
Yes. Yeah. No, how can you tackle that, right?
So, look at the Oracle L list and tell me how often women respond. Yeah, it's the same thing in other email discussions and threads and forums that you will not see a lot of women. And the thought is that there's no women. It's not that there's no women. It's just that if they send out, unless they are honestly telling men how great they are or talking about an acceptable subject, sports, cigars, whiskey, something male-oriented, they don't get any response. They don't get any response. So they just stop sending out what really interests them, which is probably technical content and interactions. And that's where a lot of the women have side channels when they need to technically talk about things. And one of the things I was really fascinated in the Microsoft community, they have technical conversations with the other women. They brought them in as peers from the very beginning inside what we call the PASS community. And they built that out. These guys were really big about, well, yeah, you can come in and we want you to actually talk to us technically because we know you won't stay. Women were very powerful, these women that started this. And to this day, they have strong technical conversations between each other. And this made a huge shift and a huge success rate. And, I've always said this, the first SQL Saturday I went to, it was SQL Saturday Denver in 2012. And I walked in and I just walked around and went, where'd you get them all? Where did you get all these women? I run the Denver Oracle user group and I have 7%. How did you get 40? And I was freaked out. I was totally freaked out. And Jen and Sean McGowan were nice enough to sit me down and explain how WIT developed in the Microsoft community. And I promptly packaged that all up and took it back over to the Oracle community. I just was like, I'm stealing this all. Goodbye. You know, it was fascinating to me because they were doing exactly what I always wanted to do. I didn't know that somebody had already figured it out.
And again, that's so many topics to talk about and so many things to talk about. I'm gonna wrap it up because you have a busy day.
Otherwise, we'll keep going. I don't want to. Yeah.
But I do want to appreciate the time that you took, Kellyn, for this. I do want to point people towards your book, and you'll find it in this conversation, right? And I would say always reach out to somebody. You're never alone. You're never alone, and there's always people on your side that are here to support you and want to see you succeed.
Correct.
And yeah, no, I really do appreciate the talk.
I appreciate it too. Thank you so much. It was a nice break from my day today.